Hopefully not very much.
I'd like to call the meeting to order. It's a committee of the whole. It's Monday, August 26, 2013. I would ask you to please rise and join me in the pledge to the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We're gathered here for the purpose of the Committee of the Whole to discuss the Addison LLC. But we will follow the agenda. On to agenda item number 2. Any announcements? Are there any announcements from the dais at this time? Mr. Grabowski?
I have nothing.
I have nothing. Any aldermen at this time? Seeing none, we'll move on to public comment. We don't have written. Did I just include that in here? We don't have written statements. Okay. We're going to handle public comment the way we normally do during a regularly scheduled council meeting. That is, anybody in the audience who wishes to provide comment may do so. We ask that you keep it to 3 minutes. We ask that you address all comments to the dais. You may ask questions, but not necessarily get answers back from us. In addition, we ask that you keep it to 3 minutes to respect the other folks who wish to speak behind you as well. That having been said, not Clerk Spencer, Clerk Cyprian, is that correct? I'm bad with names. Do we have anybody signed up for public forum this evening?
We do. We have 4 people.
Great. Who's the first one?
Claude Pagaz, 566 West Gladys.
Mr. Pagash, I think you know the drill. Please approach the microphone, state your name, address, and you will have 3 minutes.
My name is Claude Paga, Chilgut 566 West Gladys. How do you comment on a project that has lingered on for so long, has been delayed, changed, and altered? So I begin to try to understand how anyone has any idea what it will turn out to be. The only thing that is truly understood is that the public finds an area that it has paid for and nothing is accomplished. Personally, making comments about this area should have been after this new rendition of what potentially and may have already been decided the public is going to get. The reality of it is, personally, I've stated before I didn't want the parking garage. But it has always been my opinion and mine alone. Others desire it. But unfortunately, with projects for this city, why does the resident always wind up paying the bulk of the expenses? Because we got partners that come in with grand ideas, with their hands in their pockets, and they never take them out.
Ellen, who's next?
Willis Johnson, 603 Rogers, Downers Grove.
Willis Johnson, 603 Rogers, Downers Grove. I'm here tonight because I'm hoping that the Addison project will move forward. I believe there will be no action on either the Plass property or what I refer to as the 109 Schiller building, which is the Old House Club, until there is parking available for customers to use. One of my tenants, Jamba Juice, used that as an excuse not to renew their lease. In calculating the parking, if we used what the code requires, recognizing that there is no parking requirement for a business in C4, the tenant's that I have would have required 709 parking spaces, which is just about the capacity of the garage as presented on several occasions at a height of 6 stories. So I would ask that you take action so this project can begin. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Kurt Warnke, 413 Fairview.
Good evening. I'm Kurt Warnke. I'm at 413 Fairview here in Elmhurst. I am the chair of the Economic Development Commission, and as part of the commission, we have monitored this project for quite some time, all the different iterations it's been through. And I come tonight to speak on behalf of the commission and to voice our approval and urge to move forward with the project for a few different reasons. One, we find that the first floor retail space would be a key sales tax revenue generator. It would also be consistent with the 2006 downtown plan. The deck, as Mr. Johnson just alluded to, would provide for parking that would accommodate and bring up to, not necessarily up to code, because there would even be more spaces necessary, but at least remedy to some degree the vast underparking of the downtown. Also considered would the design of the project. We would necessarily take into account safety and ingress, egress issues, pedestrian safety as well, and traffic flow. And lastly, throughout the different iterations, we would find that excess commercial space should be considered, whether it be office or additional retail, to maximize the sales tax revenue and to, again, be in line with the downtown comprehensive plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tamara Brenner, 137 North Caroline.
Tamara Brenner, 137 North Caroline. I have a few thoughts on this whole meeting tonight. I'm glad that we're finally having a meeting where this is on the agenda, because the last time this was really discussed as a formal agenda item in council was December of 2010, outside of the renewals or extensions of the contract date. I know that the various economic development groups in town have been discussing this repeatedly, even since the zoning commission made its determination back in May and issued their report in June. And I'm curious what they've been discussing with the help of city staff, because nothing's been discussed publicly up until now. And of course, I have no idea what is going to be discussed now. I kind of find it interesting that we're hearing urges for the council to take action. I don't know what the council could possibly take action on. The request for a 6-story building's been withdrawn. If there's going to be a 6-story building proposed again, that has to go through a whole zoning process. A 4-story building, if we're going to do that, we've got no diagrams about what that would look like. And I'm concerned that the statements from the various economic development bodies don't necessarily take into account the significant concerns that are raised in the zoning commission report. And at some level, what I'd like to see is a discussion of the zoning commission report amongst the council. I thought that was going to happen in DPZ committee, which I guess after the withdrawal of the application that became unnecessary, but I think it still is necessary for the council to look at the report pretty much piece by piece, because it doesn't apply just to the height. It's the height in consideration with other things, and some of those things are really applicable and should be considered by council. I do want to bring up again that I am aware that there have been meetings of small groups of people about this that have occurred, and the public is still kind of in the dark. I feel a little bit in the dark, even though I've tried my best to keep tabs on this project. I understand it was an oversight that this meeting, the plan for this meeting was inadvertently left out of last week's council update. But still, this meeting has a number of people here. That's great, even without an announcement, but announcing it and keeping the public informed about what the process is. What process are we going to follow from here on out? on a regular basis, that would be really appreciated. Thanks a lot.
Diane Risky at 300 Winthrop.
Diana Rixey, 300 Winthrop. I'm here as a citizen living in Elmhurst, but also as a commercial office real estate broker who has seen a huge trend in my business that's changed over the years. And the trend has been that tenants are moving downtown for labor, specifically IT labor, marketing labor, the young 35-year-old who's really creating and booming with companies today. And the problem that I have with my tenants, I represent tenants in DuPage County, primarily in office buildings along I-88. These tenants don't want to move downtown for labor. They want to, they spent their whole lives commuting down, working for somebody else. Now they have their own company. Now they want to be able to attract labor and stay in the suburbs. There's a very big trend that people aren't talking about. There's a lot of press and cranes and so forth with tenants moving downtown for labor. What's coming around the bend is that tenants really, a lot of them, not most of them, want to stay in the suburbs and prefer to be in a suburban city downtown location. We need parking for that, and we need office space for that. I have a client right now, can't find anything in Elmhurst, and it's a real shame. The spaces that are here don't meet code and aren't big enough. There isn't anything much over 3,000 square feet that's available that meets code. So you're missing an opportunity for this new trend if you don't put office space in Elmhurst. They need the parking, and they need the space, and they need the space to meet code. We have the amenities. So I'm here to say that, I'm a believer in the office space of this project. I'm a believer of office space coming to Elmhurst. They populate, their density feeds the retail like nobody's business. They're here, they're having lunch, they're going to the movie theater afterwards. So as I'm representing tenants in the east-west quarter, I'd like to see Elmhurst in my backyard as a competitive city. Right now we're looking at Lombard. Their downtown is about 2 blocks long, but they're very easy on the zoning. They want the office tenants, they get it. Some of the other suburban cities do too. We need the office space here, and even with this project, we're not going to have it for 2 or 3 years, so I ask you to consider helping populate your office tenancy in the downtown market. I don't know if I can, but I brought a little piece that I'd like to hand out, which shows all of the tenants that are moving downtown for labor. Would that be okay?
If you can hand it to the clerk, we'll make sure it gets distributed.
Okay.
Ellen, right here. Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Clerk Cyprian, is there anyone else who signed up to speak?
That's all I have signed up.
Is there anybody else in the audience who did not have an opportunity to sign up on the sign-in sheet that would like to participate in public comment at this time? Anybody? Seeing none, we'll move on to the meat of our conversation here. Agenda item number 4, business before the committee. I'll set this up a little bit before I ask Assistant City Manager Kops to take us through his presentation. As the council will recall, actually this is something that originally was an idea from Mayor Levin to bring the council up to speed on where we are on the Addison LLC redevelopment, or the Addison parking deck. At the time, it was determined that there was an application pending before zoning and planning, so we thought it was inappropriate at that time. Subsequent to that, bless you. We have had a report and a finding issued by the Zoning and Planning Commission, and we felt it was important before moving forward, certainly based on some of the input from zoning and planning, that the city council be brought up to speed, as the majority of this deck will ultimately be city property. We thought it was important that the city council be up to speed on what the zoning and planning commission had to say, and also possibly have a discussion about where we want to take this moving forward. That having been said, I have a statement I'd like to read that I had the city attorney helped me craft, and that is, tonight the city council will hear a presentation from city staff regarding the Addison Street project. It will consist of a historical background of the project and any potential modification in scope of the project. I would like the council to have a discussion of the project after the presentation. To do that, I want everyone to understand that the opinions expressed tonight by the elected officials in no way implies any approval of the project which may exceed current zoning standards. Any variations or conditional uses would, of course, need to go through the public hearing process. So I make that statement because certainly there are going to be council members who are going to have potential questions or opinions that may impact the project, and ultimately, depending on what the project looks like, may require to go back through zoning and planning. So certainly opinions discussed tonight should not be construed by anybody as approval. That having been said, I would ask do you have anything to add, Jim?
I do not.
I would ask Assistant City Manager Kopp to take over the meeting. I know he's prepared a presentation to bring us all up to speed. Mr. Kopp?
Thank you.
Hold on a second. Mr. Bram?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the statement from yourself that was advised per City Attorney Storino. Well, first off, I want to say we have not seen this presentation at all, and that's a concern of mine. I voiced that concern right before the meeting to City Manager Grabowski, because in order to have pertinent questions, it would be nice to have the material in advance. I noticed that it's on board docs now, which between 4 o'clock and 6:30 it appeared, but I haven't had a chance to actually review this until just now. But my point being is, I do have concern with, depending on how in-depth the discussion becomes, on skirting that might be a little harsh or dramatic word, but skirting the process of the Zoning Planning Commission if we discuss this at length before it goes through the Zoning and Planning Commission. And again, I don't know what's the content in here to say if we're in that gray area or about to cross that line, but I assume City Attorney Storino that we're going to be guided through this process, that we don't cross that line?
That was the reason that I asked the city manager and the mayor to consider those words that were just read. I'm very sensitive to making sure that we don't invade the province of the Plan Commission. So I guess I would say to all the aldermen that, as the mayor indicated, opinions about what should happen or shouldn't happen ought to be balanced by the fact that we have a process, and that process includes the Plan Commission. But I certainly have looked at what Assistant Manager Kopp is going to present, and I think we're fine in terms of staying within the province that's appropriate for this board. And also given the fact that I know that for a long time citizens have expressed to me they want to know, what's the historical background. Aldermen want to know what has gone on in the city, and I know that Mayor Levin, former Mayor Levin, Alderman Levin, asked for this some months ago. I think it's appropriate.
I agree with the perspective on the timeline and how we got to where we are today, but as I flipped through the slides a few minutes ago, it seems like we're talking about or being proposed to talk about the issues that the Zoning Planning Commission found and stated, and depending on how that discussion develops, wouldn't we be skirting the process as I stated earlier?
I don't think so. I don't. I think, Michael, that in fact talking about what work the Planning Commission did would only be informative to the board in terms of going forward.
Talking about them, but talking about how we resolve them is a different story.
That we probably would cross that bridge if we got there.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, Give me a second. At some point, we have to proffer an opinion. But it's appropriate if it does.
Sure it is. Absolutely. We would be, if somebody wanted to go in partnership, that would be possible.
Alderman Bram, and maybe I can address the council in general on this. I see this presentation as one that's fact-based with possible options as city staff has interpreted what some of the issues that zoning and planning had. However, at some point, as the co-applicant and ultimately the owner of this building, we are going to have to share our opinion, and I see no better time to do it than in a public forum like this. Whether or not those opinions may or may not require additional variances, at some point, this body is going to have to express opinions, and they may or may not require variances. So that's where we're headed. I appreciate the caution. I believe that this is fact-based and it does not lead to any one conclusion. However, as it relates to the conversation that happens up on the dais, I would encourage the opinion. I think we need to see what the city council wants for this primarily city project.
I agree. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with your statements. I just want to make sure we're doing the steps in the right order. And depending on where the discussion goes, it's possible that we would take them out of order.
Noted. City Manager Grabowski, do you want to add to it? Or, all right, Mr. Kopp, if you'd kick us off here.
All right, thank you. To start off with, Addison Street redevelopment project. Just make sure everybody's familiar with what we're talking about, where we're talking about. This is the central business district. Here's the underpass, railroad tracks. The parcel we're talking about is right here. Blowout of it shows the parcel where the Thorn property, and people remember is a Thar restaurant, we're on it right there. It's about 228 by 178 feet. It's just less than an acre. Presentation objectives. The timeline, talk about the milestones, how we got to where we are today. Zoning and Planning Commission report, talk about what was requested and then the findings of the Zoning Planning Commission. Project options, staff has looked at possible options that we think will suffice or correct some of the issues that Zoning and Planning Commission brought forward. And then explore next steps, options with the City Council. The timeline, the downtown planning is a continuous dynamic process. We're constantly looking for ways to better the central business district and better Elmhurst as a whole. And this, just for context, 2004, the city was the first contact the owners of the 175 West First Street, which people know as the Hurley property, for possible future parking deck. At that time, there was no agreement. The owners of the property, it wasn't the right time for them to sell the property. And from that time, the city kept in contact with them a couple times a year, see how things were going. And then in February 2006, the city adopted the downtown plan. And one of the main issues in the downtown plan was parking in the central business district. On June 2008, Addison LLC presented a proposal to the city to redevelop 175 West First into a parking deck for commuter parking, and then redevelop 135 through 149 Addison, the Thorn Building, and the Thar property into a parking deck with first floor retail. The stipulation, though, was Arco Murray, who was a partner at Addison LLC, would need to be the general contractor, construction manager for the construction of 175 West First and the construction of the parking deck on Addison Street. All the bids, as it did with the First Street parking deck, would be all open, public bidding, sealed bid, and as from 135, 149 was the same. In February 2009, the redevelopment agreement was executed with Addison LLC. The main tenets of that agreement were that the city agrees to purchase 175 and 149 Addison. At the time of the agreement, Addison LLC controlled all three properties, the 175, the 135, and the 149. The agreement was that we would purchase 175 First and 149 Addison. We would loan them $3.5 million for the purchase of 135 Addison, and until all the tenants were vacated from the building, not to go any later than May 18th, 2013, which is the time of the last lease in that building, and that Addison LLC would buy back the retail space of the deck at 135 Addison. The city purchased 175 First in March of 2009 for $1.85 million, and built a deck that's existing right now. And in January 2010, they purchased 149 Addison for $970,000. And then in July 2010, we demolished 149 Addison and created an employee parking lot there. March 2012, the developer vacated and conveyed 135 Addison 14 months earlier than the deadline. And at that time, the city and developer extended the timeline. We actually did it 3 times, 3 letter agreements, to investigate the possibility of making this a possible better project with an office component in the proposed deck. And the way that came about is back in 2010, I had a meeting with like 5 or 6 restaurant owners in the downtown. The discussion at that time was for them to do some kind of cooperative marketing to make Elmhurst a destination for people come and have dinner. After dinner, they go to one location for maybe a cocktail after, and vice versa. And so one of the parts of the discussion that came up from the restaurant owners was density in the downtown and getting the people from Elmhurst into the downtown. At about the same time, there was an office component, an office tenant at the 116 building, had about 30 employees. Each one of those restaurant owners said they knew they left. Their cash register knew they left. And so at that time, I talked to the city manager, Tom Borchard, and said, you know, we get to build this deck basically one time. Is there a possibility that this could be a better project? We met with Addison LLC. They looked at the possibility that this is actually some design concept, which was presented to City Council in December of 2010. And then they began working on, is there a possibility this can happen, and how that development would work if there was an office component, who would own it, who would manage it, and things of that nature. In fall 2012, the demolition of 135 Addison. In February 2013, Addison LLC filed an application for conditional use for building height to build a 68-foot high parking deck with approximately 20,000 square foot of retail on the first floor, and then 30,000 square foot of office. So it's 15,000 on the second floor, 15,000 on the third floor. At that time, they had a tenant for the property, and that was Arco Murray National Construction Company. That's when they figured they had a tenant, and they'd move forward with the application. In June 2013, the Zoning and Planning Commission designed both the conditional use and the variation request. And in July 2013, the developer withdrew the request for conditional use and variation. Addison LLC said the tenant they had at that time, due to the business's growth and success, that this project of 30,000 square feet would no longer meet their current or future needs. And subsequently, the tenant has purchased a 54,000 square foot office building. So that happened in July, and July 15th is when the 3rd letter agreement ended, and so the city and developer extended the timeline for construction management agreement till January 2014. The way it works is we're supposed to have an agreement with them as construction manager, and then the construction is supposed to start no later than March 2014. And this is an opportunity for the city council to take a look at the project and review it, reevaluate, and see where we go forward with it. Zoning and Planning Commission, the initial request, as we said before, conditional use to go to 68 feet, 4 inches, and then variation. The way our zoning code works, if you go above 45 feet, you can go to 90 feet with conditional use. Once you go above 45 feet, setbacks become a part of the building. And it's setbacks from zero level, from ground level. And so the variation request, there was a front yard setback from 25 to 0. Side yard setbacks, I think that's 10%. 10% of the width of the lot on each side, so that's 27 feet to 0 on each side, and then a rear yard setback of 15 to 0. Well, the findings of the commission report, it's been out to the public. I'm sure you've all looked at it. What we tried to do is compartmentalize it into certain categories rather than talk of every line on the commission report. And the issues that came up were the loading dock issue, office space, is there a need, parking supply and numbers, safety concerns were raised. It's a traffic ingress and egress in the alley and at 2nd Street, and the pedestrian vehicle conflicts in the alley and at 2nd Street. So the first, a loading dock. And loading dock, to this point, no design has contemplated a loading dock, though the code right now says that any commercial or office district, doesn't say C4, it just says office or commercial district, if it's over 7,000 square feet of space, then it requires a loading dock. So there needs to be a discussion and evaluation of the need for a loading dock in this project. Now, the commission itself, throughout discussions, have talked about reviewing the need for loading docks in central business district as it is with every other district. The office space, is there a need? The zoning planning commission report talks about the Tracy Cross report being put in as evidence for the project, and at that time, Tracy Cross evaluation was about 60,000 square feet of vacant space in the office space, which is right around 18 to 20% vacancy rate, which actually was lower than the surrounding area. If you look at Oak Brook, I think it was like 21 or 22 at the time. Today, because of some absorption, was approximately 40,000 square feet of vacant space in the downtown. But the bigger thing, and I think we heard it tonight at public comment, is the supply. What kind of supply do we have, whether it's Class A, Class B, or Class C? And the difference for the Class A, it's the quality of the architecture, the quality of the building, the quality of the infrastructure, all high-quality stuff. It's well located. It's got good access. It's got proper ceiling heights for today's demand. It's got elevators, and it's not just the quantity of elevators, but it's the speed of the elevators also. High-quality finishes in the common areas. You'll see that in some of these office parks. We walk in, there's fountains and there's plantings, and it's just a really nice quality common area. And then a lot of the amenities that go along with it, such as parking in the immediate area, fitness centers, access to food service, and the like. That would be a Class A space as compared to a Class B, which is just a notch below that. And it's missing many amenities, such as the parking right there at the location, fitness center, quality common areas, the same level of architecture and infrastructure. And then the Class C would be considered like the older buildings, and categories usually buildings over 20 years. They're in need of extensive renovation. The architecture is less desirable. The technology and the infrastructure are outdated. There's no elevators, no amenities, things of that nature. But the thing of it is that the tenants today that are doing this movement possibly from the suburbs like Oak Brook or the big office areas, wanting to be in like a vibrant downtown area, walk out of your office space, you go have lunch or whatever the case may be, is that finding that quality Class A space, and the supply of it in Elmhurst is very limited. So the people looking for a Class C space aren't going to be looking for a Class A space. There's a difference in rent rates also, where the person looking for a Class A space isn't even going to look for at a Class C location. So it's a matter of the supply of the specific class that the tenant's looking for. So is there a demand? It depends on the supply and which class they're looking for. I mean, we have a lot of second floor office space right now. No elevator, antiquated, weak infrastructure, but that Class A space is limited. Parking supply and numbers. What we did is this is basically the C4 district. We looked at it and we said, as Willis Johnson mentioned tonight, or Kurt, I'm not sure. Well, anyway, we looked at this area and said, if this was not C4, we all know that in C4, parking is not required, the city supplies the parking. But we said if this was not C4, how much parking would be required? And then we took the same area and said, we looked at private and public parking and said, how much supply is there today? So we first looked at the zoning required parking, and we looked at it by class, which our zoning ordinance has it by class. For instance, a library museum is 2 per 1,000, dry cleaners 3 per 1,000 square foot of space is what that is. General retail, 4 per 1,000 square foot of space. Funeral homes, 5. Restaurants and taverns, entertainment, 10 per 1,000. Theaters, for every 4 seats is 1 parking space. And service stations, 5 per 1,000. If we did that for that area we just showed, the demand or the required by ordinance would have been 4,762 spots. Now, we did it by looking at the total square footage of the outside of the buildings. We did it through GIS, so the number could be a little bit less because it's usable space. But then we looked at the existing supply in the same area, customer employee parking, 1,646, commuter parking, 914 spots, and on-street parking, 444, for a total of 3,004. What I did is I took out the commuter parking because I don't think commuter parking can be full credit because during the day it's used, but it's available for consumers at nights and weekends, which is very important. So I would say that in the study we did, the supply is somewhere between that 2090 and 3004, well below what the required zoning parking would be if this was not a C4 district.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
if I may ask a quick question. The customer employee parking, does that public and private
Yes, it
available
is.
spaces?
Yes, it is. And then we've also, in the last few months, have been talking with the EDC, Chamber of Commerce, City Center, as alluded to before, and they were in agreement also that the parking demand is fairly high as compared to supply in their eyes. Future demand for parking, we just looked at some of the areas that we think are going to be in a demand of parking, development of the Addison Street Municipal Lot. I see that in the future being a development, therefore the 64 spots are there now, would have to be displaced somewhere, most likely in this proposed parking deck on Addison. 149 Addison is the 18 spaces where the Athara was for employee parking. That will obviously be displaced if there's a parking deck built. We look at some of the vacancies down there, 130 to 134 North York. That's got 17,000 square foot of vacant space right now. There's some contemplation about that being sometime entertainment or possible restaurant space. If it were, there'd be a demand of 170 parking spaces. The 136 North York, the old Elks Lodge, that's right now 6,000 square feet. If same thing, that's being marketed as entertainment or a restaurant venue. That'd be 60 spaces. And we have had calls here from possible tenants of that location that said that the biggest downfall of that space right now is there's no parking for it. The donut hole parking, which we'll talk about a little bit more as we go into the presentation, but that's currently 63 spots. And then a potential Addison corridor redevelopment. I mean, there's been discussion for many years, even going back to the 2006 plan that talked about the potential Addison corridor redevelopment. Therefore, the demand for parking would be increased. And that's just the general infrastructure need for parking throughout the central business district. You know, it's a matter of having the parking inventory prior to a developer building his building, because the developer's not going to come and build their building without the parking that's needed for their project. Safety concerns raised. That was the traffic ingress and egress in the alley and at 2nd Street, and the pedestrian vehicle conflicts in the alley and at 2nd Street. So what I did here is I just took some slides or some pictures from the traffic report that addressed some of the major issues that were brought up in the Zoning Planning Commission. This first one here shows sightline distances with the two-way traffic in the alley of a vehicle exiting the alley onto 2nd Street. This is 2nd Street here, York Street here, Addison, and the alley. This is facing north. That there is some sightline issues as a person creeps out from the alleyway due to cars here, and the person exiting, the sightline distances with this this is one-way traffic in 2 lanes. This one looks at the truck access into the alleyway and out of the alleyway. As you see with a truck of any size, it's going across the 1 lane or coming out across the 1 lane to be able to make those turning radiuses. The deck that was proposed to the Zoning and Planning Commission showed the ingress and egress into the alley. And this just shows some of the sightline issues with pedestrians and vehicles coming out of the parking deck as it was proposed. And this is some of the turning radiuses getting into the deck and some of the possible conflicts. This is coming in from the north and the south and making, if you're coming from the south, that large U-type turn. This is egress out of the deck and some of the issues as far as the turning radiuses. If you see this one right here, if you're going to go south of the deck, you'd actually have to turn into the oncoming traffic lane to go south. And this one here just shows there were 2 areas of ingress and egress on the proposed deck that was presented to the Zoning and Planning Commission. This is one of the other ones right here, and it just shows the possible conflict of vehicle pedestrian with pedestrians using this alleyway. So looking at the Zoning and Planning report, staff took a look at these ground floor issues and said, is there ways that we can improve them? And so we got together, a small group of staff, and just threw a bunch of stuff on the wall and said, how about this, how about that? Came up with some different concepts. And then we had a larger meeting with staff, police, fire, public works, engineering, planning and zoning. And we all sat down with those options and picked them apart to see if we could find things that make them better. So what I'm going to do now is, there's two of them that we came up with that we're both seem to resolve a lot of these issues, and that's what we'll go over some of those right now. Option 1, ground floor, just for, this is Addison Street, 2nd Street, York, and then First over here. Let me get my notes here, I can see this one. So the first thing we said to resolve a lot of the issues that zoning and planning came up with the alley is say, don't allow access into the alley. Don't allow cars or pedestrians into the alleyway. The other thing was to try to create a one-way alley. This is, still has some study from engineering to see if this is feasible, to go one way this way or even one way the other way, based on terrain radiuses and the tightness right here. But it could stay as a two-way, but some of the advantages if we can make it a one-way here is that we could put a bump out in this area right here that can put out drive the car 6 or 8 feet away from the building, therefore have a little bit of better sight line for pedestrians and vehicles as the cars come out. Again, don't let pedestrians in the alley. What we show here is an elevator in this corner that dumps in the Schiller walkway so they can make the traverse the Schiller walkway. Dump them on the Addison Street right here so they can do Addison Street. But then if there are people using the parking lot that want to make it over to 2nd Street, then we allow a stairwell right here to a protected sidewalk. And that's the area we purchased from the auto clinic. So we put some kind of barrier, wire, fence, something of that nature, not to allow a pedestrian get into the alley. The pedestrian have to walk all the way down to 2nd Street before they can cross. So keep that pedestrian vehicle conflict would not be there by allowing them to be in that protected stairwell. So we said all deck ingress and egress would be off of Addison Street. And the way to make that a little bit better, one of the reasons we talked about the egress originally from 2nd Street was if a person using the deck wanted to go north, once they were done using the deck, it would have to come out and go all the way around to make a big circle around before they can go north again. But if they came up through 2nd Street, they go right over to Addison and go up north. So we looked at and said, what if we make all the ingress and egress right here off of Addison Street, and then therefore make Addison Street two-way from the access to the deck to 2nd Street. That way a person leaving the deck can either go north or they can go south. But once it gets past here, go back to back to one-way traffic again. The other thing that zoning and planning talked about was the narrowness of Schiller Walkway, and that as you get a taller building, it even starts looking narrower. So one of the things we contemplate and made a possible recommendation is that set the first floor of the building back 5 feet. And so the first floor goes up 15 feet. So for the first 15 feet, the walkway would be 21 feet rather than 16 feet. And it will give that visual of a more open space. We talked to the engineering about this, and it can be built this way. There's a premium to build it this way, of course, but there are some other options that maybe there can be just a couple columns in there to support that. This look as an opportunity for the open view up to the first 15 feet height, and it allows for possibly tables or chairs, a possible covered outdoor cafe type thing if the retail space was used on the Schiller Walkway. The other thing too, which we'll talk about a little bit more in detail as we move forward, there's a 6-foot vacation of the right-of-way. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we go forward. Also, the reconstruction of Addison Avenue, that's scheduled for resurfacing next year, so maybe look at the 2006 plan and some of the things dealing with this deck, we can maybe do some of that prior to that. And lastly, on this option, the retail space would wrap all the way around the Schiller Walkway to a total of about 18,000 square feet. This is a typical upper floor plan for this layout. And what this shows is 90-degree parking, about 140 stalls. You may lose a few of them when the final engineering is done because of columns or turning radiuses or anything of that nature. But here's where the 6-foot vacation comes into play, is that to put the parking lot, for the optimal engineering in a parking lot, you put 90-degree parking in. And to do 90-degree parking, you need 60, 60, 60, and then the columns in the middle. The lot depth, the building depth is greater than the lot itself, which is 178 feet. And so the thought was to move the building 6 foot into the right-of-way. It's a very wide right-of-way. It's 80 feet, which we'll talk about that a little bit more as we move forward too. Let's see what else I've got anything there. Again, the elevators would be in the corners and the stairwell to a protected sidewalk. The deck spots would be about 8.5 feet each, just as they are with the other decks we have in town. There is one other alternative with this option, and that is to make the parking for 2 of the bays diagonal parking. As you get to diagonal parking, you only need 57 feet rather than 60 feet. And this would keep the building on the lot. Now, the downside to this is you lose about 11 spots per floor, but it's not the optimal engineering because it adds movements in the deck that may be unwanted. Let's say, for instance, if you're going to come in this deck, the ramp goes up. If you find no parking in this stall, you find no parking here, you have to traverse this one more time, they go up again. Okay? It's not that that's terrible. We've all been in parking decks where if it wasn't for the signage, you'd never make it out of there. It'd be like a bad Seinfeld episode or something. But what also does is for people who aren't familiar with the deck, they're going to follow the signage. They're going to say, outs this way, outs this way, outs this way, and I'm going that way. More parking, more parking, more parking, I'm going that way. But when people start getting familiar with the deck, they may start making unwanted movements. And that's why they're going to come up here, they're going to park in this stall right here, for instance. Now they know to get out, they got to back out, and they got to go around here and then go out. But what they'll start doing is they'll come out of here, they'll back up like this, and they'll start taking shortcuts to get out. When they talk about traversing a deck, they do timings, and I'm not totally familiar with them, but I know that, for instance, a 45-minute traverse through this parking deck, by adding this, it maybe becomes a 50 or 52 second, something of that nature. It adds a little bit, but it's not a lot. I mean, and this is not the optimal, but it does work, and it's better than a lot of decks I'm sure all of us have been in. Then option 2, again, do not allow any access into the alley. Now this deck, the way this is set up, there could be a tendency for someone to come out of the deck and want to go down the alleyway. I mean, we could sign this, and it's just to try to keep the vehicle and pedestrian conflict as minimal as possible, not to add any more load to this alleyway, whether it can be one-way or two-way. Try to keep the load off of that alleyway. Again, protect the pedestrians coming down in a protected sidewalk. The one-way alley again if possible. And then the thought of that you do Addison two-way down to this location. Part of the issue with going this way is that you lose more parking on Addison Street because it'll be north parking only. You wouldn't want to put that in there because people coming down will see a parking spot, either they do a U-turn or they back into here, they back out, they try that spot, or they come in here, they turn around just to get to that spot. So the recommendation would be you would remove the parking on the east side of Addison Street for this. If you look at this design, really, this is really our Schiller deck expanded slightly for more spots, but it's the same thing. Commerce Parkway, it's widened. You have sidewalks here. You could have a sidewalk for the pedestrian access all the way through. That would not be an issue, but you're still putting pedestrians and vehicles in close proximity, but it could work. Thinking about the other thing on this is the retail space gets reduced to about 11,000 compared to 18,000. One of the reasons for that is if you remember the Schiller deck, what happens if you bring the retail down right here, because the ramp is immediately going up, that you lose that ability to access into these first floor parking spots where we have marked as handicap spots, but they can be any parking. So as soon as you come in, you have to make that turn to get to these. If you put the retail in like this, the ramp's going up, there's no access into this area right here. But then again, this contemplates a 6-foot into the right-of-way also, and the reconstruction of Addison Street. The typical upper floor plan for this, same thing, if you do the 90-degree parking, it's about 117 stalls as compared to 140 stalls. Again, this program could also be done with the diagonal parking. Same traffic flows through here, the diagonal parking, to keep it on the lot if that would become an issue. But as we'll talk about later, that 6-foot vacation may work into the whole redevelopment of Addison Street. Yeah, and I said if it was diagonal parking, again, you would lose 11 spots, bring it down to 106 spots per level. And this here is just the donut hole potential. There's been a lot of discussion about the donut hole for years, actually, what's going to happen to the donut hole. But this may be an opportunity for us to take a look at the donut hole and maybe make some potential improvements for it. But I just put this slide up here to show you this is the donut hole. Whenever people talk about donut hole, that's the area they're talking about. This portion right here is owned by the city. The city also owns a small portion right here This is an alleyway, but the majority of this is owned by the owner of this building right here. So this is the donut hole. And some of the potential, well, these are pictures of, in St. Charles, if you go just west of the river, there's a McNally's, there's storefronts on North Avenue. This is the alleyway that used to be behind those storefronts. What St. Charles did is they put a parking deck in with retail on the first floor that wraps around to this walkway, pedestrian gathering place also. This picture right now is taken from the photographer's back as to the parking deck. So it just shows it can be open space, fountains, gardens, and that's the back of the buildings that front North Avenue right there. This one here, this is the McNally's right here, hair studio. This is actually a residence right here. This looks like the front of a building, but this is actually the back of the building. The front of these buildings are on North Avenue. This is the alleyway or the pedestrian public space that's part of that project right now. And again, the parking deck is behind the photographer here. And this shows, this is the parking deck here with retail on the first floor. This is that same space we're looking at right here. So it opens up that area as we could potentially do with the donut hole and Schiller walkway. Now just some discussion on the Addison Avenue right-of-way. And like I said before, this is scheduled to be resurfaced in 2014. So if there's an opportunity for us to make some corrections or changes now, it would probably be more beneficial so we're not redoing what we will be doing next year. And the 2006 plan did look at Addison Street and said, hey, there could be some improvements made here. If you look at the way Addison between 1st and 3rd, this is a pretty typical scenario for Addison between 1st and 3rd. 17-foot drive lanes, 18-foot diagonal parking here, 10-foot on the sidewalks. And with the 17-foot drive lanes, what that does, it causes people to drive faster. Anybody's driven on Addison Street as compared to York Street, you'll drive faster on Addison than you do on York Street. And the diagonal parking is not the optimal as far as safety parking because you're backing blindly into the traffic. And it also causes a street wall or screen wall to the businesses there, especially due to the crown of the road, which brings the back of the vehicles up. It blocks the view even more. Oops. So what the 2006 plan contemplated was, hey, make the drive lanes 12 feet wide like they are similar to York Street, slows traffic down, makes people more observant of their surroundings, take the diagonal parking to 16 feet rather than 18 feet, and share that 12 feet with the pedestrian walkway. So make them both 16 feet. When we looked at it, and we look at these two different options, one and two, that there's a possibility of another scenario, and that would be taking the drive lanes at 12, like I talked about before, removing the diagonal parking because it's not the optimal as far as safety and parking. It would reduce some of the spots and allow a 5-foot bike lane on Addison also from 1st to 3rd. Now, I don't know if you're all familiar with the project that's happening really quickly here is the bike corral on Addison Street. It'll be a pathway to that bike corral. This also here, if you look at this also shows a 6-foot building bump out in there. So you would go 6 feet, it would increase the sidewalk here by 5 feet, parking 8.5, 12, 12, 5-foot bike lane, 8.5 parallel parking again, and then 13 feet on the walk over there. This could be done, and what happens when we do the resurfacing, we can grind it so the crown of the road could be moved if it had to be moved one way or the other to suffice. Again, that would reduce the number of spots. The diagonal parking spots right now, on option 1, would be a loss of 14 spaces. It would go from 33 down to 19. And in option 2, it would be a loss of 21 spaces, go down to 33 to 12 spaces. But it'd be a safer parking, and it would be a better view of the storefronts that go through there. Let's see. And then a third option that could be out there too with Addison Street is that, depending on whether we keep this on the lot or not on the lot, is just make this like a possible open space or meeting space. It's going to be either like 23 feet or 31 feet, depending on how we do the building, or possibly you could put benches, garden, fountain, whatever it may be as a gathering place on Addison Street. Just another option that could be evaluated. And then last I have are a couple slides. It took the zoning and planning report to the city council regarding the downtown plan from April 2006. And in the purpose introduction of the downtown plan presents parking as a major downtown planning issue. It recommends that we incorporate parking within mixed-use developments in the future. That the need for additional parking in the downtown area was a major issue raised throughout the review. And this goes back to April 2006, and that comment really hasn't changed since then. In particular, there were comments about supporting current parking needs as well as providing additional new parking to support any new business or development coming into the downtown area. So to build the parking before they got here. And then in an environment where it's difficult to provide additional surface parking, which we found emphasize additional deck parking, which we have moved forward with the Large Street deck and the possible Addison Street deck here. And then there was some talk about considering a deck approach to the Schiller parking area, which is referred to as a donut hole. They call it the Schiller parking area, but that's the same as a donut hole, which we talked about, the contemplation of that space being moved over to this parking deck that were on the Addison Street. And then again, continue to work with the city center for location of employee parking to maximize on-street parking. This has been a concern for many years. I got an article from the Chamber of Commerce from like 1962 where it talked about the issues of employees parking in the spots where the customer should be. So is there a way that we can work on moving the employee parking, subsidized employee parking, maybe free employee parking? I'm not sure as part of this deck. This deck, even back to the redevelopment agreement, never contemplated any commuter parking. It was all customer parking or employee parking. And then again, just a consideration for need of additional parking in the core of the downtown. So looking at the possibility of creating more parking, being proactive about the parking, I looked at what the options 1 and 2 would produce in parking spaces depending on the height of the deck. The 45-foot would have, option 1 would create 474 spots, option 2 and 44, a difference of 90, 55, 65, 75, 85 would go up to 1,134 spots, or 952 with option 2 with a difference of 182. So at this point, we're looking for questions, discussion, direction from the city council as far as the Addison Street project.
Thank you, Mr. Kopp. With a note of the time being 7:30 and I believe the start times for the committee meetings being on or around 7:30, depending on the conclusion of this information. I think we're out of time. We could entertain maybe, and I would look for the chair's direction on this, maybe 5 minutes of clarification, but I think originally when this was pulled together, I had asked city staff the intent, and the hope would be that we would have at least 2 meetings to discuss this information a little bit further. I didn't want to cut off Mr. Kopp because I thought a lot of the information he was presenting was relevant. I don't know how deep we can get into a discussion tonight. I do appreciate the information. I think I would recommend, if the council's amenable to it, and I know we actually have some other presentations coming up, but we do have September 3rd, which is our next scheduled council meeting. Would the council be open to furthering this discussion or beginning this discussion now that we have this information? I don't know how we start a conversation and stop in the next 5 minutes. I would say that maybe that's something to consider in addition. Now that this information has been presented, as pointed out to Mr. Bram, this is new to all of us. It would certainly give the council time to submit questions to city staff so that we can have a productive committee of the whole conversation on the 3rd. So that'd be my wrap-up. Alderman Mulliner.
I would support that. I think that it would be best if we could have a longer discussion time for this, so whether we started at 6:30 or whether we did it after the council meeting, but something so that we can make sure that we have an appropriate amount of time to discuss this, because this is a huge project and people are very interested in it, and I think that we need that opportunity. I don't think there's time to do it this evening.
Okay. Anyone else? Alderman Bram.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Once again, process-wise, the information that was presented to us this evening, from my understanding, the developer, the private side of this, withdrew their variance and their variance only, and the city of Elmhurst is still in agreement, right? Still has a agreement with the developer, and right now, from what it stands, it's without any variances. And with,
Actually, the last design that was presented to the council still requires a variance. The discussion of whether or not a loading dock is required or not. The last design that we saw as a council did not include a loading dock. So if we add it or don't add it is a conversation we have to have, because that variation is actually still required. If the last presented options to the council, we move forward with what we saw. So that one question needs to be discussed.
so that's where I'm leading, is that if that's the case, then it goes back to that whole process question. I don't know I don't know what is actually presented to us today. These are options being presented by Assistant City Manager Kopp, which I'm making an assumption. I don't know if it's right. I'm afraid to always do that for obvious reasons, that this has already been discussed with our partner in this agreement, and that is this an official application? Is this the city council brainstorming and then going back to our partner on the private side? What is before us, and then how does that fit in, once again, the whole zoning and planning commission standpoint?
City Manager Grabowski would like to answer.
Sure, thank you. What tonight was twofold. One, the request from the mayor and city council some months ago to overview the project. And secondly, while we had that opportunity, to address the issues that the Zoning and Planning Commission brought forth in their report.
Who is we? Who is we when you make the statement of addressing the issues?
I would say that staff initiated the design changes. Assistant Manager Kopp has talked with the developer of the construction end of the partnership to see if the garage designs that staff came up with would work. Keep in mind that no final design has been set, even in the contract with Addison LLC. There was no final design set for the garage and the office space. There were some concepts in the agreement, but no final design. And so with the issues that zoning and planning brought forth, we thought it would be an appropriate time to address those.
Mr. Mayor?
Alderman Levin.
Okay. I think I would just like to add two things to the discussion. One is that a number of the issues that were presented by Mr. Kopp tonight are important to address irrespective of the height of the project. The developer, under the initial application, without going to the Planning Commission, could have done everything except the loading dock. The issues on ingress and egress and the safety issues, access in the alley would have to be addressed whether it was 4 stories or more. So I know that a number of us talked about, following the commission's hearing, needing to get some input and look at ways to look at that. Second thing is the developer was looking at office space, and we apparently encouraged that, and now the developer, our partner, doesn't have an interest in taking that on. And in a sense, the city, as a partner, can step into the driver's seat and provide direction to where this project goes. And if the city, acting through the city council, decides it wants to do something more than the 4 stories or something that requires a variance, the city then becomes the applicant. That doesn't mean that the zoning commission is going to do what we want, but this is the time to look at it. I have been very eager to have this presentation so that everyone would know where this project started, and so there could be some discussion of where it's going to go. And I think it's appropriate for the city council to talk about this as a body in public about what the future of this project is, with my hope that whatever it is, it happens relatively soon.
So is the city council in agreement that we should try to schedule a meeting next Tuesday to further this discussion? If there's any process or procedural questions, certainly that's something that can be addressed throughout the week to make sure that we don't bump into anything that makes anybody uncomfortable. But before we wrap this up, keeping in mind we have committee meetings, I'll go to Alderman Gutenkopf.
Just a quick question, and perhaps it can't be answered tonight. I was under the impression that we were joint applicants with the developer currently, and what I'd like to know is how do we move from joint applicants to the city being the applicant, as Alderman Levin just stated. that this was a joint project and that we were partners.
Good
and-
question, Alderman Gutenkopf. Okay, 1 second.
Here we are.
Whether a partner, if necessary, would take it back through the process.
But the redevelopment agreement speaks. I think.
Either one's in. And we're not showing. I'll ask City Attorney Serino to chime in on this. Certainly, we're not, we still have a partner in this.
Which Alderman?
The option is for either partner to take it through, if necessary, a new iteration to take it through zoning and planning. Does that answer your question? I mean, the option is there, and we still have a partnership. We haven't abandoned that partnership.
So the way that the agreement's currently written, we don't have to go through any kind of new agreement with the developer in order for us to take this project forward?
I don't believe that's the case.
No, I don't think so either.
These are good questions, and maybe that's something that Don can expound on at our next meeting to set the table a little bit for discussion. Any other conversation before I ask for a motion to adjourn to go to committees? Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Alderman York with a motion, Alderman Mulliner with a second. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? That motion carries. Thank you.